Russian President Vladimir Putin concludes the 16th BRICS summit in Kazan. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken pledges an additional $135 million in humanitarian aid for Gaza and the West Bank. And the French Foreign Minister announces a total of $1 billion in international pledges for Lebanon. Welcome to the Economic Bulletin, where we present comprehensive coverage and expert insights on key updates regarding pivotal economic trends and financial shifts.
Соответствующие подтверждения получены уже от более 3 десятков государств, включая наших ближайших соседей и партнеров.
يعقد هذا المنتدى في وقت يشهد العالم فيه تحديات وأزمات دولية متعاقبة وغير مسبوقة.
БРИКС уже играет заметную роль в глобальной экономике не только сегодняшней.
We start off with the BRICS summit, where Russian President Vladimir Putin has wrapped up its 16th edition in Kazan with statements at a press conference. Putin affirmed that 35 countries participated in the summit and some will be later become permanent BRICS members, noting that they discussed BRICS expansion in bilateral meetings at the summit. The Russian president also confirmed that BRICS countries will enhance banking communications and increase settlements in local currencies. He added that the constructive approach in the BRICS work allowed them to discuss a wide range of ideas, adding that the future holds a promising vision for a multipolar world. Putin highlighted that while BRICS members have yet to find a replacement for the SWIFT system, they are actively working on addressing this by utilizing local currencies for trade. The Secretary-General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, emphasized the need to advance artificial intelligence in developing countries. This came during his speech at the final day of the BRICS summit. Antonio Guterres also added that peace initiatives should be strengthened. BRICS leaders adopted a final declaration outlining key priorities, including a commitment to strengthening multilateralism and expanding partnerships with developing countries. The declaration is structured into 4 sections: strengthening multilateralism for a fairer and more democratic world order, enhancing cooperation for global and regional stability and security, deepening financial and economic collaboration for equitable global development, and expanding humanitarian exchanges for socio-economic advancement. Related to the BRICS summit in Russia is economic expert Karim Ismail. Welcome. Now, when we look at the 4 sections of the final declaration of this year's summit, what do you think are the key elements that are functional and fundamental that we can get from this summit?
At the beginning, the summit came in a very important time in the world, especially for the Middle East and the European region, because of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine and between Palestine, Lebanon, and Israel. And the geopolitical scene, there is one polar controlling the economy and the political decision on a wide scale. This is why the summit has come in a very important time. After the joining of the new countries, including Egypt, Ethiopia, and United Arab Emirates, all of this has added a momentous to the summit. Very important resolutions were taken by the BRICS summit leaders. All of them feel lots of responsibility and hope. And their peoples as well are having lots of aspirations, including a new unified currency or the exchange of local currencies and the de-dollarization, or at least to create a parallel currency. Another important thing is that the new development bank for the emerging economies and the developing countries, it's very important for them in the upcoming period for the funding and the facilitation the bank is going to grant for the infrastructure and the support of localizing industries in the countries with emerging economies. The trade exchange between the member states is also an important point. I'd like to mention that a country like Egypt and other developing countries should have high production in order to have an effective role in the BRICS, because the producing countries will have much fortune and luck in this group. They also talked about the initiative of the Bulletin road, the great Chinese dream that's going to be highly activated, and it will take very important steps forward. We will also be able to use our navigational corridor, our Suez Canal, of course, because after the latest political developments, Egypt and the international trade were affected, which increased the shipping prices worldwide. I think there are important goals after the BRICS, and there are steps taken on the ground, not only meetings and conferences that looks diplomatic, but rather they're going to be very effective on the ground, and they will be reflected on the peoples of the BRICS countries.
Now, the BRICS Club of Emerging Economies may be a long way from rivaling the IMF or challenging the US dollar dominance, but the summit with its new batch of members shows clear signs of growing weight. Do you agree that perhaps the Western capitals are seeing this and they are perhaps agreeing, or perhaps there's signals that the West is losing power, or that they're seeing this emergence of a new power, economically speaking?
I totally agree that this power will have lots of influence, and the West stumbled because of the Ukrainian-Russian war and after the repercussions of COVID as well. The labor cost in Europe is very high. The energy cost is very high as well. The inflation is invading the world. When the United States increased the interest rates in the world and collected all the hot money in the world, which created inflation and recession in the whole world, including the Western world. Today we can see Ukrainian products in the Western markets, which affected the European industry and caused the closure of many European factories. This is the role of the emerging economies and developing countries. The Middle East or the MENA region will have lots of luck in the upcoming period, because this group includes lots of big countries, including Russia, China, and India. India owns technology that's very advanced, and they own the know-how of IT and software industries. China is known to be the factory of the world, and China also started to give up on the old principles and ideas, and they started to transfer the know-how and technology to the friendly states of China. They started to open other factories in countries with emerging economies like Egypt. China also started to support the infrastructure in Africa, and they created a special fund for this purpose. China is supporting the MENA region massively. The map of the economy and the map of the power is dramatically changing. And we can see this on the ground. As analysts, we always wondered where are the movements on the ground. The ideas are great and they have and they are very ambitious. But there were no movements on the ground. But the movement started to happen. Many countries started to join. Many countries participated, and they are aspiring to join, like Turkey and other countries, which will affect the West and the United States. We will give up on the idea of the single currency. Of course, this cannot be achieved overnight or even soon, because the whole reserve in the world is linked to the dollar. Oil is linked to the dollar. Gold is also linked to the dollar. The United States managed to create lots of things to link the whole world to the dollar widely. And of course, if the world wants to give up on the dollar, it will cause a great crisis. So this has to happen gradually, and there should be an alternative. We have witnessed several bilateral summits among the BRICS leaders for the trade exchange and bilateral exchanges, and they agreed to do trade exchange in their own local currencies, and there will be a special bank, and there will be accounts in other currencies different from dollars through which trade exchange can take place. Of course, this will affect the dollar, and the countries that have problems in dollar reserve, this will make a difference for them.
All right.
Because now BRICS member states should start producing, because all of them have all the requirements of the production. They can be exchanged with the countries that have raw materials, and some countries can localize industries. We need to localize the industries in these countries. Egypt has a goal and a political vision and political leadership that insists on localizing the industries, and they provide all the possible support to the national industries and the national industrialists.
Let me just ask you about this, because are there economic wins for Russia in specific? Because definitely, and according to analysts, there have been a series of diplomatic wins. The presence of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and the presence of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, president of a NATO member, Turkey, which has expressed interest, as you said, in joining the BRICS group. But for Putin and for Russia, the simple fact is that so many leaders have traveled to Russia for the talks, and that was useful in countering the narrative that his country now is facing isolation from the global economy. Do you agree?
I totally agree with this. The Russian model sends a message to the whole world, which is that when countries are strong, having their own weapon, having their own food, and are able to neglect all the Western sanctions, because Russia sent lots of messages to the West. Before the war even, Russia suffered from sanctions and many obstacles with the West. But now, when all the world leaders are attending the summit in Russia, in all the current geopolitical conditions, this is a success for the Russian diplomacy. It will provide Putin with lots of potential. He used to be a very strong leader, and now countries are being in alliance with him. A country like Turkey, which is a NATO member, is attending, is also significant. Having very important leaders in Russia is very significant, will send lots of messages, and will create changes in the economic relations. Russia was supported recently by China in the supply of the industrial requirements and needs. Russia started to change its markets. Also, Russia is known for fulfilling their promises to the countries regarding the investments and the agreements. This will be positively reflected in Putin in the upcoming period and will increase his political influence in the upcoming period.
Right. Thank you very much, economic expert Karim Ismail, for your insights and for joining us on Q News. And now we move to the latest developments in the MENA region. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has pledged an additional $135 million in humanitarian aid for Gaza and the West Bank. Blinken stressed that it is very critical that the aid enters Gaza. Blinken made these comments in a news conference with Qatar's Foreign Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani in Doha. Government data showed that Saudi Arabia attracted $25.6 billion in foreign direct investment in 2023. This figure represents a 50% increase from 2022. Foreign direct investments now account for 2.4% of Saudi Arabia's GDP. By the end of 2023, total foreign direct investments stocks was 897 billion riyals, up 13% from the previous year. As for Lebanon, French President Emmanuel Macron has welcomed world leaders today at a conference in Paris aimed at supporting Lebanon. Leaders are attending the conference from all over the world with the goal of raising approximately 500 million euros to address the growing humanitarian crisis resulting from Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon. Moreover, French President Emmanuel Macron has announced that France will provide a €100 million aid package to support Lebanon. Macron made this statement during an international conference taking place in Paris today, aimed at raising funds and mobilizing humanitarian aid for Lebanon. He also added that the war in Lebanon must stop immediately. The French Foreign Minister announced that a total of $100 billion in pledges has been raised for Lebanon. In his closing speech at the Paris conference, he stated that the aid includes $800 million in humanitarian assistance and $200 million designated for the Lebanese army and security forces. The conference, which brought together over 70 nations and international organizations, was aimed at providing critical support for Lebanon amidst its ongoing crises. Furthermore, the High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell, has announced that the Union will provide the Lebanese army with €20 million in 2024 and €40 million in 2025. Borrell stated that they will also supply humanitarian support worth €80 million.
40 million to the Lebanese army, and from the point of view of humanitarian support.
Foreign Minister of Germany, Annalena Baerbock, has announced that Germany will provide a further €96 million in humanitarian and development aid to Lebanon. Baerbock emphasized that Germany recognizes the suffering in Lebanon and is taking action to support its people. The People's Bank of China has announced injecting 799 billion yuan into the financial system through a 7-day reverse repurchase agreement at an interest rate of 1.5%. The central bank stated that these measures aim to maintain adequate and abundant liquidity in the banking system. Reverse repurchase agreements involve the central bank buying securities from commercial banks with an agreement to sell them back in the future. The Bank of Korea has announced that South Korea's economy grew just 0.1% in the third quarter rather. This growth fell short of forecasts of 0.3% to 0.5% and followed a 0.2% contraction in the previous quarter. The bank noted that exports fell by 0.4%, marking the first export decline in 7 quarters, while imports increased by 1.5%. Year on year, the economy expanded 1.5%, missing market expectations of 2% and raising concerns about the Bank of Korea's full-year growth forecast of 2.4%. In the U.S., existing home sales fell 1% in September to an annual rate of 3.84 million units, the lowest level since October 2010. This decline is attributed to higher mortgage rates and home prices. Housing inventory rose 1.5% to 1.39 million units, while the median home price increased by 3% compared to last year. The continued drop in sales suggests a deepening drop in residential investment. The Bank of Canada cut its key benchmark interest rate by 50 basis points to 3.75%, marking its first significant move in over 4 years. This follows 4 consecutive rate cuts since June as the country sees signs of returning to low inflation, with rates dropping to 1.6% in September, below the 2% target. Governor Tiff McCallum noted that Canadians can feel relieved, emphasizing that the long fight against inflation has been successful. He mentioned that this rate decision should help stimulate demand and support stronger economic growth. Oil prices stabilized around 1.1% amid ongoing uncertainty in the Middle East. Brent crude futures rose by 0.6% to $75.42 a barrel. In U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures climbed 0.6% to $71.16. Gold prices slightly rose as the safe have asset remained in demand in the face of ongoing geopolitical risks. Spot gold rose 0.6% to $2,732.39 per ounce, slightly below the record of high of $2,758.37. U.S. gold futures gained 0.6% to $2,744.80. World shares had a mixed performance as investors remain cautious over upcoming U.S. elections and rising geopolitical tensions. In the U.S., the S&P 500 was 0.3% higher. The Nasdaq was up 0.6%, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 0.2%. In Europe, Germany's DAX climbed 0.8%, the CAC 40 in Paris also gained 0.8%, and Britain's FTSE 100 also traded 0.8% higher. In Asia, Japan's Nikkei 225 traded 0.1% higher, Seoul's Kospi and Hong Kong's Hang Seng lost 1.3%, while the Shanghai Composite Index shed 0.7%. And that's it for now. Let's take a look at the headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin concludes the 16th BRICS summit in Kazan. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken pledges an additional $135 million in humanitarian aid for Gaza and the West Bank. French Foreign Minister announces a total of $100 billion in international pledges for Lebanon. Stay connected always for more news and updates. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at Q News EGY to stay informed. For real-time. Thanks for watching. I'm Karim Hatem. Good night.